Company of Makers, podcast talks, workshops.
Marking the 10th anniversary of the end of combat operations in Afghanistan and 3 years since the evacuation of Kabul. This series brings us personal accounts of those who were there. Just over 150,000 UK Armed Forces personnel served in Afghanistan. These true life experiences have been difficult to talk about. They tackle challenging issues and may be emotionally difficult to hear. If you feel you may be sensitive to this, you may prefer not to listen.
Welcome to Land, Sea and Air. I'm Steve Bomford, co-founder of Company of Makers.
And I'm Tip Cullen, an actor and former Royal Marines Commando.
On this episode, we hear from Tom Corrigan, who's a former Apache pilot.
Yeah, our first Apache pilot on the podcast, and I'm very intrigued with this one because obviously they supported us so much on the ground in Afghanistan, and it'd be great to hear their version of events and also what he went on to in later life when he became slightly more creative.
Turns out he's a bit of a rock star in more ways than one.
He is indeed.
Tom, thank you so much for agreeing to come on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. Very great to be here. Thank you.
So, Apache pilot. I know nothing about Apache pilots. What does that involve, apart from a very scary helicopter? Tell me a little bit about you. Why did you decide to get into the Army Flying Corps?
I joined the Army Air Corps back in 2004. So I did officer training first. I spent kind of a year at Sandhurst, and that was one of the options there, was to go into the Army Air Corps. And I kind of wanted to do that before, so I'd done a lot of the selection process, which is similar to the RAF, so kind of lots of medicals and aptitude tests, they call basically, can we teach you to fly is what they're looking at. And I kind of thought, yeah, Apache, that looks pretty awesome, up for a bit of that. And it's always a bit of a risk because you don't know what aircraft you're going to get or if you're even going to pass the pilot's course. And again, pilot's course, I was quite lucky. It was only about a year and a half for me. It can be a really long, drawn-out process, though, especially recently. That's another political conversation about the training pipeline at the moment. But yeah, and to say, kind of got my wings and got put onto Apache, which was fantastic. So it's something I'd wanted to do since I was a kind of pretty young lad, really. I just thought, that looks pretty epic. And a lot of people obviously put you down and say, no, there's absolutely no way you're going to do that. You get a lot of stick at school and stuff. But then there's always that part of my brain that was like, well, someone's got to do that job. Someone's got to do it. Why shouldn't it be me? So yeah, that's in a nutshell how I kind of what I wanted to do, and luckily enough managed to go out and do it. So yeah, I was really excited when I first qualified, and yeah, on top of the world really when it all worked out.
So when was that?
So I would have got my wings, I think, in 2006, and then it's about a year on the Apache training. So you kind of do what's called conversion to type initially. So that's the kind of basic, how do you fly it as an aircraft, up, down, left, right, all that kind of stuff, flying it at night, etc. And then conversion to role is the combat element of that. So then you move to Wadisham, which is the kind of frontline base, as it were, join a squadron and learn how to fight it, essentially. So you're doing all the ranges, firing all your weapons live, etc., which you do that a lot in America because the ranges aren't big enough in the UK. And then, yeah, you're kind of a frontline qualified, as it were. So you're ready to go. And at that time, Afghanistan was kind of in full flow. So it was that kind of not if you were going, it was when you were going.
Right.
And we didn't really have enough pilots, so you knew you were going to go, and you're going to go there a lot, which was, at the time, which is what you wanted, because that's what everyone talked about. That's all everyone did. So you were just kind of chomping at the bit to get out there, really.
So when did you go out there?
So I did my first tour in 2009. So that was a summer tour. So ours was slightly different to the standard Herrick's. So you did about 4.5 to 5 months, depending on if you had a kind of leadership position, because you had to be there a bit for the handover takeover a bit earlier or later. So went out there in the summer, and we were all kind of thought it was going to be fairly quiet, to be honest. It was that kind of, look, we're here as a peacekeeping force. It's all, don't expect to do much or anything like that. And it was not like that, to be honest. It was full on. It was pretty intense. I think it's safe to say.
So when you were doing your training, were you training for Afghanistan, or were you sort of still training for a kind of Cold War type scenario, with like Russian tanks hurtling across Europe?
A little bit of both. So when we were in the simulator, that's all kind of geared up to the kind of generic, as you say, Russian armoured opposition, so kind of T-80s and MBTRs, all these kind of things. And you actually go and do like a training package at Spade Adam, where they got a bunch of Russian kit. I don't know where they got it from, but they're trying to shoot you down, essentially. And you do have that in your kit bag, so to speak, to kind of be like, well, these are the tactics they would use, this is what we can deploy against them, etc. tactics. But it was always in the back of your mind that, well, this is all great, but we're probably not going to be doing this anytime soon. And then when we were gearing up for Afghanistan, it was all very Afghan orientated. So we would be trying to emulate what we might see on the ground. So having JTACs, Joint Tactical Air Controllers, essentially a guy on the radio who's trained to call in fire from you as a platform. And so that you were trying to emulate that on the ground, because, actually, weirdly, the kind of British countryside wasn't that different to the green zone. So lots of foliage, lot of places for people to hide, lots of buildings all close in next to each other. So being an aircraft, that's the tricky thing. You can't just level the compound. You've got to kind of identify what room they're in, what window they're firing from, etc. And that's a real art. Is kind of, if you kind of think about it, it's like flying over Bath or something and saying, right, can you find your house? Tell me where your house is. And you've got to find your house. Then you've got to get the weapons system, the targets, the sights onto that house, and make sure that the sights that the aircraft are looking at is the same one you're looking at out the window. And you can't get it wrong. You've got to get it right. So that was the hard bit, essentially. So we did a lot of training for that, but again, it was really hard to kind of be prepared for what it was actually like when you got there, which was very different.
So I'm sensing there was a bit of a culture shock, if that's the right phrase, in terms of what you'd been training for and what the environment was actually like. Can you tell me a bit more about that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the training was really good, but it's such a massive leap. I mean, to put it in context, so I went out there. So on the Apache, you're training for a specific role when you go out into theatre. So you're either a front seat, which is nearly always the commander. So they do the guns, the weapons. They have the tactical control, command of the aircraft usually as well. And then the back seat, who's actually physically flying the aircraft. So you can fly it from either seat, but that's generally what you go out there. And most times you'll be trained to do one of those specific roles. So the first time I went out as a backseat pilot. And so when you go into theatre, they go, okay, we'll give you a familiarisation flight. So one of the outgoing squadron will take you up and kind of tell you around all the hot spots, be like, oh, this is a place they like to hide. We've noticed this here, we've noticed that here. So I was kind of like, excited, but this will be quite, relaxed. Just dip your feet in the water. And we were up 10 minutes and they were like, yeah, troops in contact, requesting Apache, so my front seater was like, right, have you got your big boy pants on? It's all kicking off. So it was literally like first airborne in Afghanistan, and it's like, firing on targets straight away. And it was a big kind of, okay, this is happening now. So I think we all kind of knew it was potentially going to be like that, but I certainly wasn't prepared for how quickly it was going to go from you've literally arrived in theatre, off you go, right, it's all happening now. There's no build up. There's no like, oh yeah, this nearly happened or that nearly happened. It's like, no, straight 0 to 60, like bang.
Mm. So what was this deployment like? What were the kind of key moments for you?
Yeah, I think very kinetic, I think is what some people would describe it as. It was still at the stage, I think, where the Taliban were kind of up for openly engaging our troops in kind of firefights, essentially. Later tours, it was less so. It was all very much kind of lots of IEDs, and they got very wise to our rules of engagement. But this tour, it was a lot of firing. Like, I'd say as a detachment, we were kind of engaging most days in one way or another. Or you were escorting in the Chinooks, the IRT, who have obviously been called out for medevac. And again, they would often get engaged, even if we weren't directly being shot at. They would try and draw in the Chinooks to try and have a go at them because they're enormous and they've got to land on the ground and they know where you're going. It was pretty intense. It was pretty full on. As I say, there was like lots of moments when you're like, is this really happening? We're just firing, lots of times in the aircraft we're going Winchester, which is when you fired all the munitions on board. So kind of 2 Hellfire missiles, a bunch of CRV-7 rockets, 400 rounds of 30mm cannon, and then going back to get more, which, yeah, we weren't really, I wasn't expecting it to be that kind of engagement, I suppose is not the right word, but
are you talking about like intensity of operations there? Is that what you're?
Yeah, it was very intense, and it was more emotional, I think, as well, because a lot of the evenings you'd have the evening brief and you'd hear about British casualties or American casualties, and that was really tough, like, because you felt like, not that you were failing, but you these things were real, these things were happening. And some days there'd be multiple casualties, multiple, life-changing injuries. And it was all very real. And the days when you couldn't prosecute a target for whatever reason, a lot of times that would be rules of engagement, when you were like, I'm 99% sure this guy is the person we're after, and I can, you get these atmospherics, as they're called, pattern of life.
So what do you mean by that, atmospherics and pattern of life?
So again, guys on the ground will be much more locked into this. So it's that, what is happening? What are people doing? So, in somewhere where it's, middle of the day, 40-degree heat, why is this person digging over here? Like, what are they up to? Or if you saw someone walking quickly, even, because no one walks quickly because it's 45 degrees and it's just not what people do. So it was that locking into what people were behaving. And that took a while to kind of, you'd see them and you're like, well, why is he hanging around there? That's odd how he's doing that. Or, why is he messing around with this? And we even had one of the other guys, he saw this guy carrying what was something long under a blanket. And he's like, well, why are you wandering around? And he's like, I could tell by the way he was carrying it. It's heavy. It wasn't like a roll of wrapping paper or whatever. It was heavy. And then he was zoomed right in, and then the bipod swung out from underneath, and he quickly pulled it back up. But he's like, well, there you go. I've identified long barrel weapons. So then you're under the engagement he had, the rules of engagement, he then engaged and prosecuted him. But it's that attention to detail that these guys, the ones that are stupid, don't last very long. So they were pretty smart, and they were aware that we were around. They usually could hear us if we got close enough. And some of the time that was enough for the guys on the ground. They're like, yeah, just turn up, because as soon as you're in the overhead, they're not interested because they know it's not going to go well for them. Which, could be frustrating for us because we wanted to have a direct effect. But as I say, I've spoken to some of the guys who are out there and said, no, it was awesome. If it was all going wrong and you guys turned up, then, it was all of a sudden it would just stop. And you'd be like, okay, well, I guess we're doing what we need to do. But there were certainly some engagements that I was, when we're doing the training, as I said, it would be this long talk-on process. So it's a very set, detailed way of doing things. So you go from a big item to a small. So you might say, right, can you see the mosque at this grid? And you're like, right, visual the mosque. Right, okay, come east 200 meters. Can you see the bridge? And be like, yes, visual the bridge. And like, right, come south this. And you do this whole thing, like talking you on. And it could take a long time. It could take 10, 15 minutes. And that's kind of often what it would experience. But I still remember on that tour we had one of the smaller fobs was kind of coming under heavy contact, and we kind of were like, you need to get out there. So we were under what's called VHR, very high readiness. So you're kind of right next to the aircraft, the bat phone, as it is called, goes, and they're like, right, launch, leg it out, and you've got to be airborne within like 5 minutes, screaming out there as fast as we can. And as we're going out there, we're kind of getting the updated report, and the guy on the ground, the JTAC, just said, right, watch for smoke. And we were like, okay, yeah, visual red smoke. He's like, right, come east 50 meters. We're like, yeah, visual tree line. He's like, yeah, visual tree line. There's a trench next to the tree line. And he's like, cool, visual the trench. We're like, yeah, visual trench. He's like, that is your target, clear to engage. And that's 50 meters from his location. And I mean, the gun's pretty accurate, but I mean, you think, yeah, there's not a lot of margin for error.
No.
So we were kind of like, yeah, this will be danger close. He's like, yeah, confirmed, you're cleared danger close. And there's that horrible, horrible feeling because you got that real pressure, because you can tell by people on the radio, like, they're on us. They're trying to come over the walls kind of thing. But also you do not want to screw it up. You don't want to because if you're on a wrong tree line, you're going to be getting friendlies. And that, that did happen on occasions, but there's always that pressure to get the job done versus, am I getting this right? Am I prosecuting the right target here? Which, yeah, it's a high level of stress. Like when you get it right, it's great. And, these guys were like, oh, it's amazing. Like literally we put kind of 200 rounds down this trench line. And they were like, guys, that was amazing. Like, first rounds on target, cleared to go home, but everything was all great. But there's always that horrible, horrible feeling that you're like, oh, have we got this right? Is this definitely the right target? And I remember that being, extremely stressful, to be honest.
So that, and maybe it's because I've watched too many films, that sounds like a very analog way. It's like walking artillery forward until you hit the target. I mean, you sort of think of an Apache as being a state-of-the-art machine, and that's how you're operating. I mean, the margin for error is, well, obviously considerable, I guess, but it's such an analog way of doing it. Yeah,
I mean, to be honest, it was very accurate. And, a lot of the time if we were guys that we were, for example, commanders, they'd often always go around on bikes. So we'd be called in by a drone or on the ground to engage them. And again, it was quite complex rules of engagement because they weren't directly doing anything at that point. They had to get like pings on their phone, etc. So we could get enough essentially evidence to be like, this is definitely the person. And with those kind of engagements, it would be, often at the time would be a Hellfire missile initially, an anti-tank missile. And again, you could put that under their back wheel using, because it's laser guided. And then you follow up usually with gun to kind of ensure, because it's the problem with that was that the missile it's designed to knock out tanks. So it's a shaped charge that essentially is going to punch through into the armor, but doesn't necessarily work that well against an individual.
Push bikes don't have much armor, do they?
No, well, I mean, that's the thing. You think this is an anti-tank missile, like there's absolutely no chance. Because again, I had an engagement and I put when you're doing it, the screen in the aircraft is smaller than an iPad. It's not big, but you're putting this laser. I say about 4Ks away is usually something off the top of my head. And you kind of put it underneath the back wheel of the motorbike. And there were two guys on the motorbike, and the guy on the back was essentially vaporized. But the guy on the front, as soon as the smoke cleared, was up and running. And I was like, this missile has gone off within 2 feet of you. And however reason, I mean, we did manage to then get him with the gun afterwards. But it was, that survivability and adrenaline, etc., all coming into it. So, yeah, it was a very, it's not what the Apache is built for, to be honest, but it was a great bit of kit. And actually the fact it could prosecute these targets. And I think that's where a lot of the kind of fast jet was harder, because, they're dropping precise munitions, but they're big munitions. Like you can't be dropping 500 pounders in the middle of Muscala. Like, it's not the thing you can do. So in that way, it was a great tool that we could be very accurate when required. And certainly as the tours went on, that requirement to be super, super precise, like you couldn't mess it up, because the whole collateral damage, you're then, essentially fueling their war effort, really.
So there's that element, isn't it, in a counterinsurgency where obviously the enemy's not wearing a uniform of a different colour and a different design. And that seemingly adds quite a considerable level of complexity. The pressure, obviously you've got rules of engagement. You're operating extremely close to the enemy because they live there effectively. Does that, it obviously does bring additional challenges, but how does that affect you personally, or in terms of the pressure of work?
Yeah, it was tough. It was, I think, at the time, I don't know how much you kind of took it on. Like, I was a bit of I didn't like to overthink it, because, you were out there doing this relatively often. And there was a big pressure, because every time we fired any weapon system on the aircraft, you would go back to base, and the first thing they would do is quarantine your gun tape. So then you'd have the OC, the boss, would be sat in, and a lawyer would sit and watch your gun tape. And so, to put it in context, you're doing it on a screen, probably
for every mission.
Every single time the weapon fired. So any weapon system on the aircraft fired, you would be having...
And there'd be a lawyer looking at the gun tape?
Yeah, essentially. Like,
wow.
There would be someone from looking at it from a legal point of view to go, and the fact you'll be doing it when you're in the aircraft, you have sweat dripping down your things, you have someone shouting on the radio, and the screen is pretty small. Like I say, it's smaller than your iPad. It's not, the sighting systems did get better when I was out there. So it went to something called MTADS, which is like a modernized version, but the older system was it wasn't great. And then when you go into the debrief, you're sat there in front of a massive TV, and you kind of sat at the front, and they're like, "Did you see this guy over here?" And you're like, "Nope, did not see him." Like, it's just, you just don't see it. And it's horrible watching it back, because you suddenly think, "Oh yeah, I did not see that person hiding there," or "I did not see this," or whatever it was. Like, all these things suddenly come out. And of course, you're in a really calm environment. Whereas when you're actually doing this, it's really high stress. There's a lot of pressure on you to get on and do the job, because the guys on the ground don't want you hanging around. They don't want you kind of umming and ahhing for ages, because essentially, their guys are taking fire, or you're going to miss a window of opportunity. Like, a lot of these, especially when you're going after high value targets, it would be a really small window, and they're like, we can get in between here and here, and that is it. Like, you can't be messy. If you mess it up, then that's months of work or whatever that's just been wasted, and they're going to go off and do whatever it is they do, whether they're an IED manufacturer or a Taliban commander, and they're going to go and cause a lot more damage because you weren't good enough to do your job. So yeah, I think it's safe to say you did feel the pressure.
That's a whole another level to the sort of, this call will be recorded for training and monitoring purposes that you get when you ring up the gas company or what have you, isn't it?
No, exactly. And, and you debrief it often in front of the squadron sometimes. Like, if you messed up or something, like if you had selected the wrong missile or something like that, everyone would, you'd put up and be like, look, this is what happened. And it was obviously doing it to learn so other people can learn from your mistakes. But it doesn't feel great. Like, you don't want to be that guy they're like, yeah, this is what this happened, or they missed this, or they could have done this better. So yeah, there's always a fair bit of pressure there.
So in terms of the tour, what other moments kind of sort of stick out in your mind that you're able to share?
Yeah, there was some like, I guess, highs and lows in terms of performance, and I'm kind of melding two tours. So I went back in 2011 as well, and that time I was a front seat gunner commander. And yeah, there were moments on both that you think, well, actually, we did really well that day. So we had one engagement where it was a high level Taliban commander, and I think it was 2 para out there in the area we're operating in. And they've been trying to get him for a while, and hadn't worked out. And then so essentially they then scrambled us out, called ops, like straight launch to this area, and they were like, right, calling on targets. He taught me onto the target. It was, again, two guys on a bike, and managed to kind of acquire the target really quickly. And we just developed this new engagement protocol because we were finding, again, I mentioned it earlier about the problem with the Hellfires was they weren't always effective. So what we were trying to do is we developed a new tactic, which essentially was flying at a lower level and utilizing the gun, using the rad out, which is essentially tells the aircraft how high it is, and it triangulates the gun. So you're getting a lot closer, but the idea is you're behind them so they don't know you're there. And we hadn't really used it much. So my backseater at the time was like, come on, let's do this. And I was like, okay, yeah, this is a good opportunity. Let's do it. And it was all lined up, and he was kind of going through this little village, and as soon as he clears the village, clear to engage, so there's nothing else around, I was like, this is perfect. This is going to be absolute textbook. And then, of course, he turns right and goes the other way. So we were like, yeah. And so you develop like a super close relationship with the guy or girl that you're flying with. Like you're flying day in, day out. And he's, you know, I won't say his name, but he is an exceptional pilot. So I was like, get me behind him now. So he kind of threw the aircraft round, and, you know, you can actually see the blades coming into the video because when you put enough pitch on the aircraft, the blades bend, which is allowed to do. It's all legit. It's all fine. But yeah, he put a lot of G-force on the aircraft, swinging it around to try and get behind this guy so we didn't lose him. And then we kind of swung round and level out behind him. And we were pretty close at this point. We were probably only a couple of 100 meters, which, considering we are an aircraft, we are flying. And it was that kind of, right, I've got 2 seconds to decide if this is a good shot still, if it's still working. And I was like, yeah, I'm happy. So engaged, and it was kind of first round hits, bang on target. And I actually got an email afterwards from the OC of the two-para squadron, two-para company, sorry. And he was just like, yeah, exceptional engagement. And, you know, you feel great because you just think, actually, we'd worked really hard. We'd come, you know, as a crew to get as good as we could. So that was, for me, it was like a real highlight of going, you know, we've worked hard and we've developed ourselves, and that is operating as pretty much as good as I thought we could get. But then there's other days where you think, yeah, this is not a good day. This is not a happy day. And one that jumps to mind was it was an unusual deliberate operation. So it was people, let's say, operating out. It's in the middle of nowhere, doing things. And so they were essentially going to it was because I was like, why are we even here? This is like the middle of nowhere. And they found a lot of opium, and it was, you know, they literally made a bonfire out of this stuff. And we kind of knew it was unusual because, again, talking about pattern of life, and everyone disappeared. So everyone off the streets. I was like, right, it's probably going to kick off because there's no one around. And then obviously you've got a bunch of military guys rocking up, which tends to have that effect sometimes, but literally everything, like, you know, kind of Wild West tumbleweed. And then we suddenly saw these two guys kind of running in a half crouch. And I was like, again, you don't run around in a half crouch. That's a weird way to run. And then they pulled out a heavy machine gun, PKM, and we're kind of lining up on the troops on the ground. So I was like, well, that's a really easy rules of engagement. So engage them, 2 killed in action. And I was like, right, I think that's it. Like, they all went really quiet then. We're like, well, they've obviously, you know, they've shown this is why you don't mess around when you've got Apaches in your head. So I was like, should be fine now, should be absolutely fine. Famous last words. And then so they finished doing what they were doing, started tabbing out into the desert. And bear again, it's in the middle of nowhere. It's not in the green zone. It's like nothing for miles. And they must have got at least a K or so into the desert. And the Chinooks called in to pull them out. And lead Chinook, as soon as the wheels touch down, you hear contact, pilot's dead. And, you know, this horrible feeling, you know, went through me, and I was like, Jesus, like, because we're there, you know, we're escorting them. That's our job, to protect them. And, you know, no one had seen anything. No one's seen any fire points. No one. So it was that, like, this horrible, sick feeling of going, well, we've totally screwed it up. So the 2 Apaches, like, one of us went down a bit lower to try and draw whatever fire was coming. And the aircraft that was slightly higher started putting down warning shots, was known. So we've essentially saved a position out in the open and started getting the 30 millimeter cannon going, because it's pretty loud. So hopefully that they're just going to get heads down to try and protect the Chinook. And then say the other aircraft was kind of in this open area between the Chinooks and the built up area to hope that, well, they're going to shoot the Apache rather than shooting the Chinook. So unbeknownst to me, what actually happened in that lead aircraft, so the commander of the Chinook sits in the right-hand seat, and as the aircraft touched down, he put his feet up on the pedals, put on the toe brakes, and I mean, this guy must have been either very lucky or very skilled. Round went behind his calves, through the center console, hit the co-pilot in the foot, and the guy essentially was like, through shock, passed out and fell onto the controls. So then you got the problem is you can't take off because he's slumped on the controls. Yeah. So he's there like shouting and trying to, and managed to tell the guys who were then running onto the back of the aircraft, and a big hairy individual kind of ran in and literally hauled him out, because it's not very big. The Chinook cockpit is pretty tight, and just basically hauled this guy out the seat. And he then essentially took off solo pilot. And it's like, and I just remember feeling like physically sick, because I was like, well, this, even though it's not directly my fault, but you think, well, I'm responsible for these guys. It's my job to protect them. And they were like, right, we're going back fast. So they just went, because Chinook's quite a lot faster than the Apache. So they went flat out back to Bastion. And luckily the guy, he was, he did recover. It wasn't an overly serious injury. And I think, it was obviously in a bad way for quite a long time. But I think, you have those moments. And like I said before, we had certain days where you had big mass casualties, like multiple British servicemen either have, horrendous injuries or being killed out there. And it was really hard, because you felt, you're doing everything you can and it's not enough. And I felt there were certain times I remember being in the evening brief and hearing these things and just being kind of just so frustrated and so angry at this kind of generic enemy. They'd done this. That was tough. So it was quite a roller coaster, I think. That you have days where you felt like, we've made a difference today. We've done this, or whatever it is. And other days where you feel like, you're just not doing enough, not being good enough, which was tough.
So looking back on that, and I'm sure there's lots of other dits in there as well, and experiences. What do you think and feel about Afghanistan, your time in Afghanistan and the country of Afghanistan?
Yeah, it's real mixed emotions, because I think, like, a lot of people do touch on the fact it is an amazing country, like, despite all that's going on or went on. And I remember doing this like early morning flight, and when we it was fairly far north, and we're like the sun coming up over the mountains, and it was like something out of Hollywood. And the guy I was with, I was like, there's only like a few people in the world, like from the Western world, that is, who have seen what we're seeing now. Like, this is like amazing, and it's so how somewhere that's so beautiful and epic is like, can end up in the state it's in. I think, like you say, it's hard. It did not end, I think it's safe to say, in a whole withdrawal process. Again, personal opinion, but we did not go smoothly. I think that's safe to say.
I think that's fair to say.
So I think that's really frustrating. And I certainly have that frustration still, that so many people, like close friends, had life-changing injuries, close friends that I joined with who were killed out there. And that's, I think that's really hard to kind of be like, well, was it just a massive waste of time? But looking back on another way, you can say, well, actually, there's a whole generation that benefited from us being there. There's a whole generation of girls that got to go to school, that women that got to do stuff that they never would have been able to do if we hadn't been doing the job out there. So I try and have a little bit of a positive spin on it. It's hard, because I think, like we all know, it feels like it was a lot of effort and a lot of loss for not a great deal of gain now. But then that's history. That's the world. Like, you have to do what you think is making a difference at the time. And I hope what we did out there did have positive impacts on some people. So yeah, I think it's safe to say it's quite mixed emotions.
Well, not least of which is probably saving British and probably other countries' servicemen and women. So, you know.
Yeah, and I think that's the way I looked at it. You know, that it was odd being out there, and I think that was a big moment when I decided my time in the military was done. Was a particular engagement when we, again on paper fairly straightforward, two guys in the middle of the night digging an IED on a road. So it's like you don't dig holes in the road at 2 a.m. Like, you know, it was very obvious what they were doing. So we were called out, talked onto target. Yeah, visual target, brilliant. Right, clear to engaged, and the JTAC's like, yeah, battle damage assessment, 2KA, great job, guys. See you later. So we turned around, went back, and I was like, oh, what time is it? And I was like, oh, it's whatever it was, 2:30. And I said, oh, yeah, the aircrew feeder will still be open. We'll still better get some food when we get back. And I caught myself doing it. And I was like, I've literally just gone and killed 2 human beings. And my heart rate didn't go up. I didn't feel any emotion about it. It was just like, yeah, done your job. Right, what's for dinner? And yeah, I kind of felt that, and I was like, geez, this is not good. And yeah, I suppose like all these things, you have to have your coping mechanisms. And mine was, I didn't overly think about the people, I suppose, when you want to look at it that way. Because like you say, like the way I saw it was you're protecting British servicemen, American personnel, or Afghan police, Afghan army. And if you don't do your job, they are going to get killed. Like that is how it is. And you are there to protect them. You're there to look after them and protect the Chinooks, protect guys on the ground. But it was that way that I just got, I wouldn't say blasé, because I still went through, you know, the diligent checks, doing it properly. But there was no, like I said, you know, my first engagement, you feel like your heart's going to come out your chest. You're like dripping with sweat. And I say, my heart rate just didn't go up. I just didn't, it wasn't an event to me. It was just like, just gone and done your job. And I'm like, oh, I don't like that. I don't like that. So I kind of was like, yeah, I think I'm done now. I think that's me.
That must have been, Tom, quite a big decision though. You know, because obviously you've done all this training. You obviously wanted to do this from a very young age.
Yeah, I mean, it's huge. I think like anyone who's left the military will say something similar. Like, you know, it's an institution. You know, it's not a job. You're part of this life, and you've never known anything else. I'd gone to uni and gone straight to the army, so that was my world. You know, these guys and girls. You know, you live with them, you eat with them. Like it's all encompassing. And the big bad world outside it, you're like, well, I don't know what that's going to be like. Am I going to hate it? Is it going to be rubbish? So yeah, it was, and it was the army. Obviously, don't make it easy for you to go either. So it's a kind of, once you press that button, it's a year. So you're not going to have a job sat there waiting for you. Maybe occasions you would, but I certainly didn't, because of the jobs I was going for. It's like, well, you know, have you got 3 months notice? It's like, no. So you got to kind of hope there's going to be a job there. So yeah, it was a massive decision, I think. Yeah.
Forward to today, looking back at that, how do you sort of process all of that? Because I mean, you know, there's a lot in there. And this is a bit of a leading question, because I think what we also want to talk about is music, because I do think that is, from what you've told me, is a very important part of your life. So I guess, how does music help you in terms of processing that, or any other ways that you find to sort of, you know, deal with your experiences, and so you can live a, shall we say, as normal a life as possible?
Yeah, I mean, music's been a huge thing, and I kind of will stress that it's not something I've ever done before, really. So it was a kind of COVID thing, where I had a kind of chance encounter with of a lady who's now a lead singer in a band that I'm in, and we just got chatting, and she's like, oh, you know, how are you staying sane during COVID? And I was like, oh, I'm playing guitar. And she's like, oh, I used to sing in a band. She's like, we should start a band. And I kind of laughed at her, because I was like, well, I'm like 38, 39. At the time, I was like, I've never been in a band. I can't do that. I'm too old. And she's like, well, why not? And I was like, I don't know, just can't do it. And she did say something that kind of stuck with me, and said, do you want to be 85 in a care home being like, I'm really glad I've never been in that band. When they said, you could have been in a band, you could have done something. So I was like, okay, fine. So yeah, and it started off as a kind of a bit of fun. And it's all got quite serious now. So as you say, like, music is such a like amazing creative force. So you can't really put a finger on how it works. Like, you can't go, oh, this is what you do. You write it, you do this, and that's how you write music. And as I say, I was totally clueless. I could play music, but I didn't know how to make it or write something original. And I felt like it's been such a huge thing since then, being able to go and perform and create music and have this really positive aspect in my life. It's very easy to get lost in it. So we did a gig last night, and the energy was unreal from the crowd. You had people doing mosh pits and like trying to it was surreal. You're like, this is amazing. Like, this is so much fun. And I feel like it's a real community as well of people who are like into music, who want to go to gigs and want to, your friends, all these different bands and fans and everything in between. So yeah, I found it really helpful. And even some of the negative emotions, I suppose, that you've had, and being like, well, let's do something, let's write it, let's put it down on paper and then put it into a song about, because one of the songs we did, and it is about essentially blokes being pretty rubbish at dealing with mental health, and like, and then the idea of the song is that actually often it's women in that traditional relationship who are there as that support network, who kind of been able to talk about it, etc. And I think, yeah, that real freedom to be this kind of exaggerated version of yourself, it's really fun. So like when I'm on stage, it's not me, it's like a kind of a stage version of me, and it's really liberating just to be like, yeah, I'm going to go up there and behave like this and like, jump around and do all this stuff, pretend to be a rock star.
So do you you sound like you're transforming into Ziggy Stardust the way you're describing this. So
yeah.
Which you may be. I haven't seen you play. So you did say mosh pit to give us a slight clue, but what kind of music are we talking about?
Yeah, so band, big plug coming up. We're called Rogue Awakening on all good streaming platforms and social media. So we started off as kind of hard rock, I would guess. So if people of a certain age probably remember Evanescence, so we have a female lead singer. So it's kind of heavy but melodic, I guess. And it's now, I suppose, going into alternative metal, you might call it. So we don't do the kind of screams that much or anything like that. You can hear all the lyrics, but the guitars are quite heavy, like big loud drums. And yeah, like I say, it was one of those things that I never would have pictured myself being in a band and doing what I'm doing, and kind of releasing music. Like, we played our first big festival this summer, and I think the more people, like guys who've been in the military and are kind of looking for an outlet, I cannot recommend it enough. Just that being able to go and just throw yourself into something, like really immerse yourself in it, of that kind of being in a band, and it's almost like being in a kind of dysfunctional family, to be honest. Like, everyone has the different dramas and trying to organize stuff and being like, well, how do we want to do this? Do we want to be more serious? Do we want to be less serious? So there's that element of like a support network, which I think is kind of similar to the military, that I think a lot of people miss. And certainly in the kind of rock and metal community, it's a really lovely place. Like, everyone's like supports each other, like bigs each other up, and tries to kind of, it's that element of, because it was weird when I first went into the music, I was like very military. I was like, this is a competition, like we're up against all these other bands and we have to be the best, which is not really how it works. So actually now this whole element of, it's like, a rising tide raises all ships. So it's, you spend your whole time supporting other bands, so like bigging them up and on social media, I'm saying, go and check out our friends because they're amazing. Like, go and listen to their new song, like go and watch them on tour. And that's how we've got most of our opportunities, is because we formed like these lovely relationships with other people in other bands or promoters or even just fans, and they've kind of gone, you should get these guys down because they're really good, or like, these guys did this show, they'd be perfect for this. And I think that's such a nice, refreshing thing in this kind of day and age where it can be almost like everything's the X factor. Like, you know, you're all battling and there's one winner, and it's like, well, that's not how it works. Like, you know, the chances of getting a record deal in these days are slim. So actually, you know, like, we're certainly, us as a band, like, well, we want to put out good music, we want to play bigger shows and festivals, but that's enough for us. Like, that's what we want. We want to kind of be as good as we can be, but there's not that drive to be like, you have to be filling stadiums, you have to be getting, you know, top 10 hits and all that stuff, you know. So actually, it's been amazing. I can't.
How long have you been playing guitar before you joined this band?
I'd kind of been playing on and off since my teens, I guess.
Right.
But that's very loose. So I'd kind of go through stages of playing for like maybe a year or two and get quite good, and then like not touch it for like years, and then come back to it again. And I think, like anything, it's a skill that can be learned. And I keep trying to say to people, because, you know, I'm 41 now, so I'm not I'm not old, but I'm not a spring chicken. And, you know, there's that element of, I'm too old to do this, I can't go and do it. And I was like, you 100% can. Like, that whole thing of like, just go for it, just give it a go, because it'd be one of those things, it'd be really sad if you think, actually, this could have been such an amazing experience. Even if you only do it once, I only played on stage once, and it was great. But I can guarantee you, once you do it once, you're like, well, that was amazing. Like, it's such a buzz, and a great adrenaline rush being on stage and performing and engaging with a crowd and feeling that energy coming back at you. I can't recommend it enough, to be honest.
Your enthusiasm and infectiousness talking about this it's really, really strong, and I think that's a great lesson to everybody. Quick question about all of that: do you think your time in the armed forces contributed to your newfound enthusiasm for music?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, one of the superpowers that I bring to the band is organization, because I think it's probably fair to say a lot of creatives like organization is not their strength. Like, they're amazing. They can write and they can do these, like, play these beautiful things that are far, you know, in excess of what I can do. But there's a lot to be said for just being like, you know, you've got to reply to emails, you've got to organize shows, you've got to like chivvy people on, and, you know, this is when we need to do this. We need to get this done by now. Like, let's draw up a timeline. Like, you know, love a timeline. But also, I think in that is that confidence to get up in front of people. So kind of now, in the way we do our stage shows, like, I do a lot of the chat between songs, and I kind of have this alter ego who in my head is called Geralt, who's a kind of weird kind of Viking type thing going on, and it's like, you know, it's a character.
Isn't Geralt the Witcher?
He is indeed the Witcher. Yes, that's where I got it
Gamer
from.
as well, then.
yeah. I was going to see if you got the reference, but yeah. So that's kind of, you know, and it's that ability to like talk and engage, because again, some bands are amazing, and then when they're singing and performing, and then they've got to talk to the crowd between songs, and they just kind of shrink into themselves, and it feels like awkward and weird. Whereas, like, if you can fill that space with something entertaining and a bit over the top and a bit shouty, and like, you know, you're like, this is a show, we're here to perform for you. And that, you know, ultimately the military is like that, really. It's like, you know, you've got to get up in front of people and talk confidently. You're putting on a show. Like, that is what you're doing. And we've all been in the military, like, people who can't talk in front of big crowds don't tend to do well in the military, because it's a massive, and it's a hard thing to do. A lot of people can't do it. So I think that element of it is definitely a big part, just having that confidence. Although, saying all that, I still remember the first gig I did live, and I've done some scary stuff and had moments when I'm like, this could end really badly, like seeing your life kind of flash before your eyes. But I was so terrified the first time I went on stage. And I genuinely was like, I'm not sure I can do this. I'm not sure my hands are going to work. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to play the guitar. Luckily, since then, I don't really get nerves that much anymore, which is great. But yeah, it is a scary thing, and because it's outside your comfort zone. Again, it's like the military is amazing, but it's quite a big comfort zone. Like we were talking about leaving, you're like, this is a place I know how everything works. I know what people expect, like how to behave. And then all of a sudden you're in this totally new environment where you're like,
Yeah,
how do I behave on stage? Are people gonna clap when I tell them to clap? And like, all these kind of things. So yeah, it's
you can't issue an order to an audience
no,
like that, can you?
Well, sometimes you can, and sometimes they're like, oh, okay, yeah, I'll do that.
Okay.
Yeah, if you do it in the right way, like, because that's the thing. If they're like, oh, okay, this is part of the show, like, you're telling us to do these, but again, it's finding that groove of what works and going,
Yeah.
and that takes time. But yeah, so I think there's definitely big bits of my military experience that help with one, that organizational part, and also being a big character on stage. Like, that's and the military are pretty good at creating characters. I think that's fair to say.
Absolutely. And I guess playing music is also a form of storytelling, and I would say the military is very good at storytelling as well, and spinning dits as well, So you said the band's name was Rogue Awakening. You said on all platforms?
Yes, so we're on Spotify, Apple Music, all that stuff. We're on Facebook, Instagram, all those good things. So give us a like.
So they're all, if anyone's interested, they're searching for Rogue Awakening, all one word, as the username.
Yes, Rogue Awakening Official. But if you put in Rogue Awakening, it should come up. And yeah, like, feel free to like reach out and speak to us, because I think that's a big thing we have with like engaging with our fans, is that engagement bit of it. It's like, to be like, no, we want to talk to you, like, have questions or whatever, or like, how do I even start doing this? Like, there's always ways to do it, and we're always happy to chat.
Cool.
We always take the time after shows. Like, we perform all around the South Coast, and hopefully a bit further next year with more festivals, etc. So like, always come over and say hi. Like, we always want to chat to people and hear their stories as well, because we all love a dip. We love to spin a dip.
Absolutely. So what we will do is we'll put the link to Rogue Awakening in the description of the podcast, to your Instagram. So if any of the listeners want to find out more, or indeed how to make the jump from flying Apaches into playing guitar on stage, I'm sure you've got some great tips as to how to go about
that. Yeah. I can always give some. I'm not sure how helpful it'll be, but I can certainly be like, I can give my limited advice. So I think the best bit is just get out there and do it. Just start going to gigs, meet people, and be like, hey, I want to be in a band. I want to do this. And you'd be surprised how many people are like, yeah, let's do it.
So, and if a stranger comes up to you and says, do you want to be 85 in a care home, and not having done it, take their advice. It sounds like the moral of this story.
Yes, exactly. You don't want, there's lots of, it's very few things I think you look back and go, I deeply regret that. It's like, no, this is an opportunity to do something, and I think for me, that was a big thing of like, anything to do something creative, to like, and whether that's directly kind of getting out some of the issues that you've had or experienced, or just something that you think is just really good fun. It's just a really nice way to spend your spare time.
That's a really good point, Tom. There are other ways of talking. You don't necessarily have to go to the GP. I mean, whether it's a friend or whoever it may be, but obviously through poetry, music, whatever it may be. Fantastic, Tom. That just leaves me to say thank you so much for agreeing to come on board.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure to be on board.
Excellent. And I will hopefully one day come to one of your gigs and see this alter ego that you've talked about.
Yeah, come and see Geralt. It's a scary man. It's a scary man, yeah.
I'm expecting The Witcher.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a bit much.
I'm kind of working on the wig, maybe. It might go up to the wig. It might be a bit much.
For our listeners' benefit, Tom does have short, dark hair, so he doesn't look anything like The Witcher.
I'm the least metal member of the band because I don't have a beard and I don't have long hair. I've got tattoos, but yeah, that's as metal as I get, sadly.
Okay, well, that should be enough. Thank you very much, Tom.
Thanks so much.
Tip. This is the first time we've spoken to an Apache pilot on any of our podcasts, and I think, how important a role did the Apaches have, and obviously their crew?
Well, they were in a lot of ways, they were the not instantaneous, but they were the support. The Chinooks needed them, which were our life support, both delivering soldiers, taking them away, delivering troops, taking them away, and delivering arm out. but they needed that protection. And the Apaches is such an incredible and awesome piece of kit that they supported that, and they looked after us. Getting access to them, unless on your specific sort of operational task or that has it tied to them, depended a lot of times on whether you were in contact or troops in contact, and then the duty attack helicopters or Apaches would then be tasked in support of you, and your JTACs or FACs and money would obviously link up, communicate, and call them in. But this was done by from the early days with my people. It was we were communicating with aviation and air and delivering ordnance or effect where it was required. But the Apache was it was a lifesaver in a lot of respects.
And I imagine that a weapon that the Taliban truly feared.
Yeah, it is. It's it's such a tool for lethality. It's got so much punch in it, and I think the people like Tom, the pilots and the gunners on these aircraft on the Apaches, were so effective at doing it and providing support. But we have to admit, nothing beats boots on the ground. But I've got colleagues that have used Apaches to recover casualties and help out and probably evolve some new techniques from when they were operating on them in Afghanistan on Herrick 9. But the Taliban themselves are quite, well, from my experience, are quite fearless, and they will fight anything that you throw at them. So for us, it was a very effective tool. And again, it gave us, I think, that level above us. It helped us so much when we were in combat with the Taliban or with the insurgents.
I think as well, Tom's experience was obviously different from being boots on the ground, but it still affected him, didn't it? Seeing all that through computer screens, I suppose, is the best way to describe it. But that presented him with some challenges, didn't it? Certainly in his second deployment.
Yeah, I mean, he did. I mean, and I have heard this from other, Apache pilots I've spoken with, how it was a bit of a detachment. But you've got to understand, even us, our people on the ground, when we used to look up these Apaches, they're such a valuable asset to us, but they're such a target. They're a flying bullet magnet or RPG magnet, same as the Chinooks. So really, I know he says it's a bit like a computer game, a world in that there, but every single Taliban on that ground wants to take an Apache out, and a Chinook. So they're the obvious emblem of everything they want to fight. And to be honest, if you're in the middle of the air and people are shooting things at you, I would feel extremely uncomfortable at the best of times. I'm not a big fan of helicopters at the best of times, but to be up there when you are the target that everyone wants to take out, and you're still having to deliver and support people in contact, that's a very, very brave and strong thing.
Quite easy to make a mistake potentially in identifying targets as well when you're probably quite a long way from the actual contact line, quite high up, relatively speaking. There's a lot of decision making that has to be made to get these things right. Yeah,
I mean, as I'm aware of, a lot of the crews are actually put through so many sort of evolutions during training that they can identify, and confirm, enemy locations. Also, hopefully not compromising. We've got obviously friendly force identifying features on the troops on the ground. So really, that although it has happened, it shouldn't. It's not a common thing. So they are well trained in it. And, they have to deliver effect. And that effect is kinetic and lethal, force. And there is, and there may well be collateral damage. But the assistance they provided, from my experience, was invaluable.
And then he obviously decided to leave because it had become a bit too normalised for him, I think is the best way to describe it. And he left the armed forces.
Yeah, I think, there are other people are talking in other podcasts about that youthful exuberance, shall we say, where you're passionate there, you're leaning into the fight, and you want to be part of it. In a way, it's some sort of passage of life, such. As you get older, even months, years, especially, you age quite quickly in highly kinetic environments. You start thinking about things like your moral compass. What way is it going? And he said there was a point where he was coming back, and he was going back into the galley or the cookhouse or whatever you call it, and he just thought that's what I was worried about. Yet he'd just been delivering death to some people, and that is, I think it's quite wonderful that you realise you're a human, and you shouldn't, the things that I've not struggled with, but you have to level up. Being involved in environments where people are being killed it's exuberance because your body's so jacked up on adrenaline and that, but it's the taking life is extremely hard to do, but also you'll never forget it. And I think if you're doing it at the level that Apaches are required to do it at, I think if you're a human, it will affect you in some way. So we have to really, I think, just keep our ears out for people that are keep our eyes out and look after those people that served, especially people that you think are a bit aloof and maybe they're a bit above mental health, and said it's not true at all. And I think Tom proved that when he decided to sort of leave the army. And you must admit, you think the training, the investment, and everything that's been done to make Tom at the level he was at, and for him to put the old 12 months, press a button, and off he goes. But he followed his dream to become an Apache pilot. And I would say to any young person out there, if that was your dream, follow it, because any person, you don't have to be a commissioned officer to do it. Any person can join up, and if they want to do that, that will be theirs. And I think that's across the wide spectrum of jobs within the armed forces. So it's not like we're putting you off. It's an incredible job and a very important job, especially in modern warfare. But for him, he decided that it had time to he to move on, to be a rock star.
Exactly, that's what I was going to say, actually. Speaking of following his dream, he'd always played a bit of guitar until he met a neighbour, and then he took up the mantle of a axe merchant, I think is the vernacular. Is that the right phrase? I don't know.
It's a creative thing. I mean, I left the Royal Marines and became an actor, and I know so many people that benefit from a creative lifestyle after being through trauma or experiencing trauma, or being a spectator to trauma, or being somebody who's suffered trauma. And I think being creative is it is slightly escapism, but it allows you to stand out, be something else, and then come back into the world again. And it could be a bit of escapism, but it helps you to sort of look back on yourself, I think.
Very often people have a kind of a creative interest and then don't pursue it for whatever reason. So I think in much the same way, if you've got a creative interest, you don't want to end up in the care home thinking, I should have given that a go, because it's probably a bit too late.
Yeah, I mean, exactly right. So that is, the thing is as well, it's quite scary, because there's a little, you think about, that's the worry zone for me, knowing, people that struggle, or veterans struggle, and they don't have that point of focus or a goal when they leave the armed forces. And he seemed to be in that for a small period, but then he looked at the creative, playing a guitar and being in a band. And in a way, I think that's a bit of a gift from the gods. That's it. Get amongst it, do it. And he can do it until he's, either exhausted with it, or he falls out of love with it. That's good to go. But if you can get something, whatever you do, when you leave the forces, just have a plan. What you're going to do, what you want to do, and make sure you're doing something that you do want to do, because otherwise everything will be in the good old days and how wonderful it was, before you left service. So, but I still do that. I still love my days in service, but you got to have goals and you got to move forward.
And he got so excited and passionate when he was talking about music, the power of music, even if it's just going to a gig. You don't necessarily have to pick up an instrument or learn new skills. You can just enjoy it in a way perhaps that you may not have done by just saying, this is my passion, this is what I like to do.
Yeah, and I think he enjoyed in a way that he's a guitarist in a band. So he's not the lead, in the band. He's not this. He just loves being part of it and doing it. And you think, if people looked at him on stage, as a rock star, and we know other rock musicians that have ended up in the armed forces, both allies and ourselves, but would they really look at him in a band and go, he used to be an Apache, pilot and gunner at times in Afghanistan? And maybe that's he's glad to be out of that loop. You know what I mean? So, obviously we're compromising it by the mere fact that we're chatting about it today, but he. I liked his positive, upbeat way of dealing with the troubles that made him leave the army, and I think he's in a good place, and long may he be that way.
Yeah, I quite agree. And if our listeners do nothing else, if they're in the area, I think he's Guildford way, they're based, definitely worth popping along to a gig and taking on a bit of metal.
Before you go, if you're a member of the Armed Forces community and need support with your mental health, Op Courage can help. Use the link in this podcast description for details. Or you can phone the Combat Stress Helpline on 0800 138 1619. If you'd like to contact us, email studio@companyofmakers.com.
Finally, we're giving a really big shout out to our funders. They support all the activities that we provide for the well-being of those who've served. The Royal Navy and Royal Marines Charity, Greenwich Hospital, Arts Council England, and the Armed Forces Covenant Fund Trust. Thank you.
This podcast was produced by Rachel Owen, hosted by Tip Cullen and me, recorded and edited by yours truly.
Company of Makers, podcast talks, workshops.